All right, want to say good evening to all those who are joining us right now. Curtis Wilson from the Big DM, and also going to be joined by Krogan from Q93, as well as Neek at night from Hot 1039 939. And as you know, this is our forum. It's the Alpha Media Columbia Town Hall that we're going to do this evening. And we have some special guests that are going to be joining us throughout this hour. We're so glad that you're going to be with us as well. So, right off the bat, as you know, we're going to be talking about the times that we're living in, which are some tough times that we're living in. And if, of course, you've been keeping up with the news, you know exactly what's been happening. Protesting yet again, this time over the killing of George Floyd, who was killed 2 weeks ago by Officer Chauvin and three other officers who have been charged. They have since, Chauvin has since been to court, and his bail is now at $1.25 million. And his next court date comes up on June 29th. So it's a situation that we've dealt with over and over again. When I say that, the unlawful killings of African-American men, women, and even young children, 82 to my count. And if you've been keeping up, I'm sure as well. And they're marching for a change. We have a lot of folks who are tired. They're really angry. They're also frustrated as to what's going on with the system. It's a system that's been broken. And not only that, but the struggle has been going on in the African-American community for over 400 years. And when we talk about that, at the very minimum, what they're marching for is to say that Black lives do matter. That's at the bare minimum, to say that Black lives matter. Tired, angry, frustrated over a broken system. They're looking for justice. And right now, that system is not working for African Americans as I say, just us. So tonight, though, we're not going to beat up on law enforcement, because it's not every single law enforcement officer that wears a uniform that's doing anything wrong. It's that majority, that's that small number of officers who are doing something that speaks volumes. So we want to talk about that. We want to address it. We want to affect change. And for that, we have a panel that's going to be joining us as well. So I'm going to tell you, we have the mayor, Steve Benjamin, who's going to be with us from the city of Columbia. Also, we have Dr. Cassie Alia. She's the founder and CEO of Serve and Connect. And we also have Diamond Chambers. She works in the marketing department at Alpha Media. We're glad to have her, as well as Police Chief Skip Holbrook, who's been doing some wonderful things with the city of Columbia. We'll hear from him as well. And JT McLawhorn, a good friend of mine, he's the president, longtime president of the Columbia Urban League, and been doing that for many, many years. And I have to say this about JT. I've known him for probably well over almost 30 years, and he hasn't aged a bit, but you'll get to see and meet all of these fine folks who have joined us on the panel. We want to say thank you as well. First up, though, want to bring in Police Chief Skip Holbrook, and Chief knows I've worked with him many years with the Richland County Sheriff's Department when he came over to the city of Columbia as well from West Virginia, but we're glad to have him. He's doing some remarkable things. So first off, right off the bat, Chief, thank you for taking time to join us tonight.
My pleasure, Curtis. Thank you for having me.
All right. Now, some of the topics that we're going to be covering tonight are going to be police brutality in the Black community, police defunding, protesting the peaceful, and also that's versus the rebellions, racism, racial profiling, discrimination, as well as white privilege, as well as solutions and resolutions to all the issues that we're dealing with. So if you're watching right now, make sure you hit a friend up and say, hey, we are live right now streaming on the Big DM Facebook, as well as Hot 103.9 Facebook. And also, too, you could join us as well at other avenues, too. So right now, let's get to Chief Holbrook. And my first question for you this evening is this. When, in the case of George Floyd, excessive use of force was used by the police, do you believe that it's mainly caused by racial motivation, or by arrest procedures that allow for improper use of force that is not always appropriate to the situation? So that's the question there. And is it a social cultural problem, normative procedure, or even both?
I think it's everything you just said. We can't be blind that there's not those cultural biases, that didn't play a factor. Poor training, the failure to intervene, which was critically important to the outcome of that situation. But just those core values that you see so much in what I consider to be industry standard language and use of force now, and that is respecting and valuing the sanctity of life, and using only the minimal amount of force that's necessary to an effect what we refer to as a lawful objective, proportional. There is nothing that was defendable about what we saw in Minneapolis. Nothing. So it's really hard to comment on something that's not defendable. There's no aspect of it that's defendable. Those conversations about what got you to that point, what was going through that officer's mind, Mr. Floyd's mind, the officer standing there. Those are the hard conversations that we got to have, so we don't get to that place again. But my goodness, I mean, the actions were appalling. There's no disagreement there, none whatsoever.
All right, Chief, let me ask you this one: since George Floyd, the incident, are there any policy changes that have been taking place at the department, or are there some that you're about to implement? And I do want to preface this by saying that I know that you're also going to be part of a national policy change that may happen as well in Washington. But let's talk about that. Anything that you have in mind that you see needs to take place?
Yeah. So great. I do think this is an opportunity for us to, to talk about really what is those. I think national standards are something that we have to look hard at because we have innovative and progressive departments. I feel like the Columbia Police Department is one of those departments that's on cutting edge, always leaning forward, looking for the best way to deliver ethical, professional policing. But there's 18,000 police departments in our country. Many of them are small. We have to embrace that, that old adage, rising tide raises all ships. Those progressive, innovative departments need to be that rising tide, and we need to set, some significant national standards that we all have to hit. And then departments that have the capacity can do, much above and beyond that. But, post-Ferguson, we saw tremendous reform in law enforcement throughout this country. President Obama at the time commissioned, probably the most significant diverse group of people to do a deep dive into law enforcement reform. And, a defining document came out of that, and that was the task force recommendations for 21st century policing. What we saw in that very historic document was two things. Number one, there's everything made perfect sense in there. But a lot of it was well underway, and a lot of it was, why hadn't we thought about that? Why haven't we put that into action? So I know in 2015 we got to work immediately on let's tell our story. Let's talk about where we are right now, what we're doing that is already recommended, but let's create some action items, some things that we can put in place immediately that help start to raise that bar. And it was simple things, just like I just said, putting in policy that you will always use the minimal force necessary to effect a lawful objective, valuing the sanctity of life. We looked at our pursuit policy and emergency response policy. We had an officer killed in the line of duty in 2015 running emergency response to somebody being shot. It turned out it was a suicide, but the tragedy of that incident was we didn't have a strict enough policy that required her to come to a complete stop at an intersection, for example. We changed that policy. We changed policy where we don't shoot at moving cars. There was a number of shootings across the state where officers were shooting at moving cars. And to me, it was common sense. First, get out of the way. Why would you stand in front of a car? But get out of the way. But, it got to the point where State Law Enforcement Division also embraced that, and they put together an educational video. We made every single police officer in this state, review. And, we were very quick in 2015 to change that in our policy. To your question, what are we looking at since the Mr. Floyd tragedy? And yeah, we will, just like we always do, because we're nationally accredited, it requires us to do policy review all the time. And we will absolutely be reviewing policy to see if we need to further define what we should and shouldn't do. Typically policy creates parameters in which you must work in. You work within these parameters. It tells you what you can do and what you should do. What we've seen kind of shift now is there is a desire and appetite for not only to have policy that creates those parameters, but specific policy or language within your policy that says what you are prohibited from doing. Talk about chokeholds. We haven't addressed that specifically in a policy because there's nothing that we train or teach that where chokeholds are allowed. But now we know that there is a desire that needs to be specifically addressed in policy, and that's something that we'll look very hard at and review.
Real quick, as we talk about the policy and things of that nature, use of force continuum. Can you explain that for folks who don't know what that actually means?
Yeah, use of force continuum, is it's like a ladder, really. It is a chart that shows an escalation of force and all the things that we have at our disposal to walk that continuum up, ultimately to deadly force. And that simply starts the very first run on that ladder is officer's presence, and then we have so many tools in our toolbox now. And I don't mean that just as weapons. We obviously have weaponless force. We use our hands and feet. We have our less than lethal options, maybe OC, maybe an ASP-baton, a flashlight, a taser, and then of course we have our weapons. But where you see most of the activity in law enforcement, it's with that first run. It is absolutely with officer presence. But the one thing that I think we have come, light years quickly is addressing de-escalation in that first run of that continuum, and that's with our presence, creating distance, creating time, putting something between us. So situations that may technically rise to a level where you would quickly traverse your continuum and get to a serious force or deadly force situation, create some space and time and communicate, recognize that somebody might be in mental crisis. So there may be a language barrier. There's all kinds of things that we have to process, but we have to reinforce to our officers. You don't have to go from 0 to 100. Create some time and distance, but that continuum is just a stair step of force. Again, starting with the presence and flowing through hands and feet, and impact weapons, and ultimately with a deadly weapon, just like your gun or an impact weapon.
I know I don't want to stay with you too long because I know we have other panelists that want to come up as well. But of course, speaking about that, first thing also too is the presence, and then also the use of your verbal communication skills that can help de-escalate situations from keeping it from going 0 to 100, depending on your ability to communicate with the individual that you may be dealing with at that time. Saturday, May 30th, during a protest that happened in Colombia, allegedly a police officer was caught on camera by a protester putting his neck on a citizen during an arrest. And in many cases, things like that aren't recorded, resulting in brutality, or even worse, could even affect death, which just happened with George Floyd. What are the implementations for police officers arresting a citizen without force?
Well, I'm not 100%. I'm tracking on that question. Are you saying what we have in place where citizens would know when force is used? Is that essentially what you're asking?
I guess basically when you're dealing with a situation, and it could be, let's say, domestic or aggravated assault that may take place, and you have a suspect who is resistant in a sense. So I guess what the question is how do you effect arrest with this person who's being non-compliant?
I think you got to use proportional force. When somebody's non-compliant, obviously we're seeking compliance. You hope that you seek compliance by giving a lawful order just with your presence. Sometimes that requires, maybe there's some disorder because there's just one of you there. Maybe you get another officer there where that additional presence creates some calm. But again, that whatever force you use has got to be proportional to what the resistance is. And the other thing that's important is the checks and balances that are in place, whether it's our body cameras that are on, our use of force reporting process, the external, eyes that are on law enforcement, which is absolutely necessary. In this situation that you referred to Saturday, not only did we capture that incident on body camera, but obviously there was photographs and other videos that showed up, and that's how we get to the bottom of things very quickly and are able to share results, look into it, look at it from all angles, but that we have a process. And it's important that folks know that we do have a process for that. We have an internal use of force self-reporting process, but then we have a robust external process when people bring things to our attention. But thank goodness for body cameras now, where we can go back and pull footage and review incidents that happen. We self-audit. We randomly pull body cameras with no complaints because we want to review how our officers are talking to people, how we're affecting our arrests. Are we being tactically sound? Are the officers being safe? Are they putting themselves, in a tactical disadvantage, or putting them in a position that creates a situation where they have to take some kind of action? We talk repeatedly about don't put yourself in a position for failure.
All right, one more question, then I'm going to switch it over to Krogan and let him get in with Cassie Alia. When we talk about what goes on in the community, bodies and things of that nature, what about citizens advisory councils? Do you think that would be an important fix, whereas citizens actually also see what's going on that you see and make decisions based on what took place in the community, something that may have happened with an officer that was unjust?
Yeah, I think there is great value in citizen advisory councils done. I think the establishment of those CACs, I think needs to be specific to what the community and the cities want, the citizens want, what fits our form of government and fits our system. I know, the Sheriff's Department's had a CAC for years. We started a CAC shortly after 2015. It has been a remarkable addition to our transparency and accountability process at the police department. We review all our high liability policies with them. We review critical incidents with them. They're part of that high risk policy development. They sit on all our discipline review boards. They literally are behind the curtains of what goes on, and they get to see the good, the good, bad, and ugly, and they get to also see the good things too. But they have been an integral part of our accountability process at the Columbia Police Department.
All right, Chief Skip Holbrook, you stay tight right there. We're going to bring up Krogan and let him get with Cassie Alia, and we'll come back with questions for you as well from those who are viewing. Krogan?
Yeah, thank you. Of course, a completely live town hall today. Powerful conversations, no matter how uncomfortable they can be this evening, Curtis. As Curtis mentioned, it is a live experience. Feel free to comment. I do want to do a couple shout outs. Doris said shared. Big part of the way you can become part of the conversation this evening is to share that stream, comment with us. Tamika will say what up to the family today. She's very excited, that we're having these conversations, Curtis.
Good deal, which is good. So Cassie Alia is going to be the next up that I'm going to be talking to. And of course, she's with Serve and Connect. And Krogan, I'll let you take it from there. Yeah,
September 30th, 2015. Officer Gregory Lee of the Forest Acres Police Department in Columbia, South Carolina, protecting and serving in our community right here, was shot and killed in the line of duty. Now, through anger and pain, it all turned to empathy and eventually motivation. And today is the founder and CEO of Serve and Connect. Our next guest, she continues to use, let's cause a common ground to really create a shift in the mindsets and eliminate those misconceptions while pushing a positive synergy between law enforcement. And Curtis, that's probably more difficult now than ever. That's why I'm really excited to bring on board. And thank you so much for being with us today, Dr. Cassie Alia Ray.
It's so great to see you, Krogan. Thank you so much for having me on.
Thank you for being here today. It's been 4 years since your husband was killed on the line of duty. And I know the atmosphere and the attitude towards law enforcement at that point was not great. I was wondering if you could, with Serve and Connect, how are you guys feeling about that attitude today?
Krogan, it may be difficult to see. And certainly we're in the heat of a lot of high emotions right now. But in some ways, I feel, dare I say, more hopeful than I had before. And the reason I say that is never before do I recall seeing so many people of diverse races condemn racism, which is critical and huge. Furthermore, I'd never remembered so many police leaders speaking out against a police act of excessive use of force and brutality. That's a big deal, and I think reflects the progress that we've made. To be able to keep up on that momentum, I think it's critical that we have to remember that at the end of the day, we're all on the same team. We're in this together, and it's going to take all of us to make that change possible. Certainly a big part of that is listening and learning, especially hearing the hurt that our Black and brown communities are facing today. It also is going to require us to lean into uncomfortable conversations, refuse to dehumanize one another, because when we dehumanize one another, we lose a little bit of humanity in ourselves. But I believe if we can hang in there, stand tough together and stand strong, that I'm really hopeful on what we may think when we look back a year from now. And hopefully we see that more progress than we've ever made before.
Furthering the conversation between law enforcement and the communities they serve, focusing on those human relationships, we've seen 3 memorials, Minneapolis, North Carolina, and being laid to rest in Houston. For Serve and Connect, how does that conversation continue from today? And I'm not talking about what that relationship looks like next week, but for organizations like yours, where do you see the next 5 years with law enforcement? Not necessarily nationwide, but right here in the Midlands.
Where do I see the law enforcement in the next 5 years from now? I mean, if the vision that we have with Serve and Connect is, we believe that at the end of the day, what we all want is more the same than it is different. That police and communities, we want our communities to be safe, our children and our families to be protected, and for children to thrive. And that to accomplish those goals takes us all working together. But working together can be really hard in the context of significant distrust that we have in our country. And I think it's important to recognize where that distrust stems from, what brings us here today, that it really is rooted in a deep history of racism in our country that needs to be confronted. I mean, certainly I think we've made progress in our country, but it's clear that we have a long way to go. And police have been at the forefront of a lot of those issues and continue to come across the repercussions of those systems. Much of what contributes to crime are non-criminal actions. It's things like poverty and disparities in socioeconomic factors and education and more. And to address those things, police can be positive agents for change, but they can't do it alone. It's going to take all of us standing together. And that's where I think Serve and Connect really comes in, is really helping to facilitate those partnerships, to create spaces for those difficult conversations and use evidence-based practices to shape a path forward. And I believe the time is now. People are talking about these issues. They're ready for that type of partnership and change. And I think if through organizations like ours, and I hope if we can create a momentum for change that focuses on those really strong multi-sectoral collaborations, we may be able to see, I think, a space where we're seeing stronger, thriving, safer communities for all.
And we hear Chief Holbrook. I want to thank him again for joining us this evening. We see him talk about the 21st century of policing. I want to bring Curtis back in for a second. As someone, Curtis, with a law enforcement background, what do you want to see, your colleagues do next?
Well, basically, when you talk about 21st century policing, it's about being able to understand what's going on, knowing your community that you're going to be working in, knowing that it's diverse, knowing that there's different cultures. So when you enter into that community, you could better understand what's happening. It's almost like putting your finger on the pulse of the community. So if I go into, let's say, a Jewish neighborhood to effect an arrest or something that's going on, at least I need to study up and learn exactly what the culture is, what are the do's and don'ts, they do, especially even when you talk about the Asian community, certain things and cultures that they have that you may not know as a law enforcement officer, and you'll go in there and you do something that'll upset because of the fact that you didn't study what they do. You know what I mean? And that's the same thing going into an African-American community. with all of the injustices that have been taking place, when an officer stops an African-American man, he's going to be defensive automatically. Whether he's asking him for his name or ID or where is he going, he's going, that person's going to jump to the defense because of everything that's been happening. So that officer has to understand the mindset to be able to deal with the situation a lot better. If that makes sense to you guys. It
does. And I think, with that relationship, there's a certain level of empathy that comes with it, because with Serve and Connect, Cassie, what I love is I don't want to get into a discussion about bad apples and like now we're just focusing on good apples, but it really is about building that relationship with the communities that law enforcement officers that they serve. You guys do so much for the Midlands. Moving forward, what is your commitment to the community to create that relationship? Because it's going to be tough to get back.
Yeah, absolutely. Our commitment to creating those relationships moving forward. I mean, I think we have always been and remain committed to our mission of igniting positive change through police and community partnerships. Again, we believe that at the end of the day, what we all want is more the same than it is different. And how do we create that space to come together? We're all like pieces of a different puzzle. We bring with us different stories, experiences, perspectives. And to be able to create that more beautiful picture requires us coming together. I think embedded within that is a deep appreciation for lifting up the voices and from the partnerships. It's both police, it's social service organizations, but it's importantly people with lived experiences, the people that Curtis is talking about right now, the residents, the everyday people who are living in our communities, and lifting up their voices and making spaces for them to be heard and to drive change. I think moving forward, we remain committed to the work that we've continued to do, but we're really raising the bar on accelerating our momentum towards progress. Some of the specific actions that we have in place for the 2020-21 year ahead is to first be able to offer more expanded support and training to police for effective community outreach and community policing. There are a lot of police that are already doing a lot of great work, and we want to help do more of that through an expansion of Greg's Groceries statewide, and also launching our Law Enforcement Community Connections program, which will help build more leadership in law enforcement that are really deeply committed to community outreach. It's also going to mean expanding our partnership with the South Carolina Collaborative for Race and Reconciliation. So they're focused on conversations that focus on healing and reconciliation dialogue, and we want to do more of that throughout the partner communities that we work with. And also, we're going to be launching a program that really focuses on investing in community-driven solutions for public safety outreach. So this would mean providing both funding and training capacity building to residents for their ideas for change. So it's a commitment to making more spaces for relationships to unfold, for empowerment and leadership to take place, and for us, all those pieces of the puzzle to really work as one together.
Well, serveandconnect.net, thank you so much for being with us this evening, Cassie. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much. And I encourage people to reach out if they have ideas, questions, comments. I would really welcome it and would love to hear from people.
Krogan, Cassie, thank you, and Curtis. I should have put your name first, Curtis. That's the name of the morning show we're going to put on.
That's all right. Cassie, thank you so much. Stay with us, of course, because we, at the end, of course, we'll have questions from those who are watching or even listening that they may have for Serve and Connect and what you're doing in the community, because you're doing so much that folks don't know. You're that agency that's bridging the gap between citizens and also the community. So hang tight with us and we'll get with you in a minute. Right now, we're off the mayor, Steve Benjamin, City of Columbia, and Krogan. And also Neek will be joining us. So we'll have all three of your moderators joining us. And again, we're online as Krogan pulls them up. We're online at thebigdm.com and also hot1039fm.com. And then also too, of course, you can catch us on Facebook, on Hot's Facebook and also the Big DM's Facebook. Mayor, how are you doing? Can't hear you. Can you guys hear him?
No.
I believe
I had it muted intentionally.
Oh, there you go.
So I'm saying, Curtis, the last thing you need is Krogan, Cassie, and Curtis, you don't need one more job. You got enough daggone jobs, man. I think
Curtis,
I think he's frozen. How are y'all? Thank y'all for doing it.
Listen, I'm just honored to be in your presence this evening.
Hey, brother. It's always good to see you, my man.
For sure. So let's talk about, people's decision to protest during the pandemic. Should be worried about protesters probably getting sick, or these numbers rising again due to COVID-19 that's out there, because it was quite a few, and it's still happening every single day.
I'm gravely concerned, not about the protests. I think there's a time to protest and to make sure our voices are heard, and the time is now. But there's also a social responsibility we have. We are literally living in the very most challenging times of the pandemic. The greatest pandemic we've seen in 100 years is having a disparate impact on Black and brown communities all across America right now. So while we see, I do see a high level of mask utilization from people who are protesting. So that's a good thing. We're not seeing the physical distancing that's also required to slow the spread of the virus. And, we had last week the most challenging week in South Carolina in the history of the pandemic. In the last 2 days, we've seen a precipitous rise that's not attributed only to the protest, but Memorial Day and everyone just kind of going back to the lives the way they were before the World Health Organization declared the coronavirus a pandemic on March 16th. We're not anywhere close to being out of the woods here. And we need to make sure everyone that while we're talking about the major issues of the day, social justice, criminal justice reform, ending police violence, all those issues, that we also make sure we take care of this one temple God's given us. We got to protect this, protect those around us, and certainly also be our brothers and sisters' keeper. Even strangers, we owe them a level of responsibility to not spread the virus. It's real. We're still in the thick of it.
and Mayor Benjamin, just the state of racism, do you believe it's getting worse, or are we simply just catching injustices in action because of things like cell phones or, let's say, social media?
Krogan, I think folks are so frustrated because this is 2020. This is we're still a relatively young nation compared to so many nations around the world, and the reality is that the issue of race is literally baked into the history of this country long before there was a country, even well before 1619. If you go back and look at the indigenous peoples who were here when the first ships arrived from Europe, we've seen some of the most horrific treatments of human beings, the dehumanization of individuals over the course of time. And that's why I think it's so important that all of us, as we talk about this, that we require ourselves to also become students of history and realize the very journey that we've been on, not only as the African seed in the American sun, which is obviously right now at the top of everyone's agenda as our babies and our grandparents and everyone watched the public execution of George Floyd. But this has been a challenge that governments alone won't fix. Local government, state government, federal government, even laws. We went through the freedom movement that we now call the civil rights movement. 60 years ago, we went through a massive historical event post the Civil War and during Reconstruction. We've got to really restructure the way in which we treat one another. We respect one another. We respect each other's humanity. And it's a deep challenge. But the problem I think you saw that we're seeing right now is we're in 2020, man. I mean, this is 1960, this is 1920, this is 1865. And yes, we have the transparency that now everyone, including those who might not trust traditional media, everyone has the opportunity to grab their phone and they can be their own media right now. So you're seeing many more images of everything coming in right now. But the challenge of race and poverty and the intersectionality of all these issues has always been a challenge here in this country. But I think post the 8 years as Barack Obama as president, post the the 70s and Black Power and the Civil Rights Movement, I think most people are finally saying that it's a damn shame that we're here. We should be well past this. A number of our children, including my two girls who are upstairs right now, are not willing to claim this reality and demanding change. It's our job to make sure that they understand that they are kind of this continuous link in becoming the architects, the constant architects of this country. And we all have to play a role. They can't be reduced to bumper stickers. It's got to be a real active role of a citizen. That with rights come certain responsibilities. We got to build this together. And sometimes it means you have to tear down certain institutions to do so.
Absolutely, Mayor. And I think it's so very vital and so very important. And with you bringing up your children, it just made me think it's just that, it's a shame that children of a certain age even have to, process this and have this on their mind right now. And it's just like, that's a hard conversation to have with just, how do you talk to your children about racism? How do you talk to your children about injustices? And that's actually a question that I have for you is that, us here in Columbia as a community, how do we deal with injustices?
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
Well, certainly, I mean, if you really want to if you want to make a friend for life, you treat their child well. You want to make an enemy for life, you mistreat their child. I mean, it's amazing how those of us who are parents, how our worldview is designed by that. Our responsibility, all of us, because all of us on this call, we're all leaders, whether elected leaders or trusted voices in the community, is we've got to make sure that we're all committing to creating a community, a society even larger, where my girls, not just my girls who will always be fine. They have two sets of grandparents who will make sure they have anything and everything they need in this world, but make sure other children not similarly situated have the very same opportunities that they have, regardless of their social status, where they come from. And many of you know, I've seen Curtis on many a trip. I actually enjoy being around children more than I enjoy being around people like y'all. Senior citizens and babies are my sweet spot. All you people in between I can do without. But since I've been mayor, I've done over 300 school visits. And you get a chance to sit there and you listen to these children, and you realize these children have hopes and dreams and aspirations when the boys are still young enough that they want to hug you. They need a hug. I mean, it's amazing that if you're actually able to tap into that human potential and give these children a fair shot at life, we could literally change the world. So these babies having to deal with things that I deal with, they shouldn't have to be worrying about racism or even hunger or shelter or safety.
Exactly.
I mean, we're better than that. We live in the wealthiest and most powerful democratic nation in the history of the world, and we can't solve some of the most basic challenges. And it's part of the reason. And I don't mean to say this in defense of city government or any government, but we tend to often go to the government to solve many of our problems. And the reality is that our solutions are based in the community. How do we mobilize the community to be maybe that more structured community that I had growing up? I had formal and informal mentors. I had Ms. Gregg who would sit in the window across the street and tell my mama every single thing that we did. And we've lost that to a degree. And we got to figure out how our faith community, I mean, people who run fantastic organizations like Cassie, how you start pulling people together and turn this pain and this passion into progress. How do we decide, okay, that behind us, that's not who we are. This ahead of us is who we are. We got to figure out how we get there, how we get there together. So I think we got to address the immediate issues before us: racial violence, systemic racism in our systems of justice. But more importantly, I think we're going to miss a moment. We're going to miss this moment if we don't use this as an opportunity to decide how we're going to go forward and do it together. We got people paying attention who never paid attention before. We got people who are saying things that they would never have said literally 3 weeks ago. If we miss this, and that's why when I got the opportunity to participate in this town hall with y'all while I was all in, if we miss this moment, then we will probably done a great injustice to this community, and I think the merit. I love this country. I love South Carolina. I'm focused on our little corner of the world right now. This corner of the world, if we can do some things right here and model out to the rest of the state, of the rest of the country, then I feel we would have done something. So that's why I'm looking forward and thinking about the things that we can do to address this pain, to capture this passion, and decide how we're going to move forward together to get some progress out of it.
Absolutely. And we thank you so much for joining us today and having this open conversation, because communication is very, very powerful. And so we've started this dialogue. So now we definitely need to make sure that we have a plan. And then within that plan, we need to do some action behind it as well.
Amen. 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 No, but thank y'all.
And that's what it's all about. But May, you touched on a lot of important stuff there. And I'm talking about, I remember growing up in law enforcement and seeing them in the blue uniforms. That was in New York and was NYPD. But whenever you saw them, it was a respect thing. And you also feared them a little bit because they were police officers, and we were taught that if you do something wrong, the cop's going to arrest you and things of that nature. But here it is, when you speak about little kids, May, I got to ask you this question. A 7-year-old asked this one, actually. Says, is it safe for me to go outside, and will a police officer harm me because of the color of my skin? And how does it make you feel when you hear something like that? So if the mayor's still with me, I just want to get that one, and then we'll move to JT McLawhorn.
It's heartbreaking, Curtis. It's heartbreaking. But it's that 7-year-old's pain and his worrying and his anxiety. Literally, you have children with PTSD based on experiences that they've had, either maybe witnessing police violence or just witnessing violence in their own communities, and it goes to the core of a police department or a sheriff's department can't do its job if you don't have that very foundation of trust and accountability that people can call you when they're in danger. So to hear a child manifest that tells us that our problems and our challenges are much deeper than I think even we can acknowledge right now. We can do better, and we owe it to them to do so much better.
We talk about
so much better, no question.
Moving forward, and how do we
get Krogan
the catalyst for change right now. We have a lot of people, like you said, Mayor, having conversations, these words coming out of people's mouths. We've never heard them talk about these topics, no matter how uncomfortable they are. We watch major news networks talk about what different municipalities are doing with their police forces. For your office, how does the relationship with the Columbia Police Department move forward from here?
Sure. And I watched the Chief's piece earlier, and I will tell you, obviously he's on this national task force now. When President Obama laid out his 21st Century Policing Task Force several years ago, he left office in January of 2017. We never stopped implementing. This is post Ferguson. So you talk about the 8 that can't wait. We have all those policies in place as we speak, and 2 that need to be clarified. We're going to make sure they're clarified in short order. The chief is already working on that. So building a department that's built on transparency, making sure you're recruiting and training the very best officers. We've had cultural sensitivity training, community policing training, peaceful conflict resolution, de-escalation techniques, mental illness recognition, chronic illness recognition training. We've been investing in training officers. When everyone was waiting for the federal government or state government to give them money for body cams, we just went in and bought them. Because it was important that not only to protect the community but also protect the officers. We had to make sure that everyone had body cams, so we were moving forward together. We put JT McLawhorn. We put the president Holbrook on our hiring committee because we had a rush of retirements at one point that left the department not looking like the community. So the last numbers I saw, 2016, we had of every officer hired, 68% of them were either Black, Brown, Asian, or female. And so it's inculcated in the way in which you do business. And by constant community policing, constant community engagement, I feel very good about my relationship and the department's leadership under Chief Holbrook and Deputy Chief Kelly and their command staff. But what we have to avoid, and I want to say this being fully transparent, is we can't rely on the police department to solve all of our problems. You know, if someone calls 911 because they're in danger or there's an issue there, then you're asking for law enforcement to show up. We want our officers to be fully trained and equipped, and we've made sure they are doing so. But they're not there to be mental health counselors. They're not there to be social workers. They need to be trained to make sure they're multi-talented and multifaceted. But we've got to see investments from state, local, and federal government, and from even this multi-sectoral leadership and collaboration that Cassie's talking about, to start addressing some of these other issues in the community so they don't become a law enforcement issue. Every issue shouldn't be a law enforcement issue. We shouldn't be asking, just like we shouldn't ask teachers to raise our children, we shouldn't ask cops to do all of the work in keeping our community safe. And I think we've gotten to the point where we rely too much on law enforcement to solve those problems. And usually when someone calls 911 or if their shots fired, that's not what a cop is trained to do. So we got to take on more of our collective responsibility in dealing with some of those issues and funding those issues. So, you know, some of this conversation around defund the police and these issues, I think it's important to note that these conversations around race and policing have been going on for centuries. We got to make sure that we don't reduce the answer to a bumper sticker. This is not the way we're going to solve this. Do we need to invest more in affordable housing? Do we need to invest more in making sure we don't have food deserts? Do we need to invest more in mental health counseling? Invest more in making sure that kids don't have to go to bed at night like I did, to listen to gunshots every night in the neighborhood that we grew up with? Yes. Do we also need to make sure we have good, strong, sound law enforcement system? Answer is yes. They do not need to be mutually exclusive. And I think we got to avoid the trap of trying to make sure that it's this or that. The reality is that it can be this and both.
Absolutely. You are so 100%.
Thank you much, Mayor.
Correct.
And I know, all right, Neek, I know you and Kroger still have some additional questions for the Mayor, but we're going to hold up. We're going to switch over to JT McLawhorn and let you, Neek, handle that one. So in the interest of time, because we did say we're going to make this announcement, we'll have more. So let's bring in JT McLawhorn, and Neek, you'll handle this one.
Yep.
Hello.
Hello. I'd like to introduce to everyone JT McLawhorn. He is the president of the Columbia Urban League. And, thank you so much for being with us on our town hall today. And, if you could, we know that they have Urban League chapters like all across the United States, but the focus that we're talking about is right here in our community here in Columbia. And tell us about the Columbia Urban League's mission we've been doing for so many years here in our community.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, great. So we have been engaged with law enforcement for a very, very long time. We started back in the 80s when we had Charles Alston, who was the police chief. They were talking about community policing a very, very long time ago. And so what we learned from that experience, when you're working together with law enforcement in partnership, it does a lot to bring the community together with law enforcement. My brother is a retired law enforcement officer. I have a nephew who's currently a law enforcement officer. My brother-in-law was a retired law enforcement officer, trailblazer in New Jersey, in the area. So I've been around them for a long time. But the thing that most law enforcement officers do not show the community is the human side of them. Normally when they come out in dealing with issues. And so quite often they come out, in a whole different personality. And so I think that what's missing from this process is that we don't see law enforcement in many ways. We don't see them as real people to a certain degree because we don't have that interaction. I think in many communities, like this in Columbia years ago, where most of the police officers did not live in the city of Columbia, or either in Richland County, they lived outside. And I think that's what happened in Minneapolis. You had so many law enforcement people who did not live in the city of Minneapolis, so they had no relationship with the community. Relationship is key to a harmonious relationship with law enforcement. We need law enforcement. officers. I told someone one time, if law enforcement officers would go on a strike, they just said, we just quit. I said, I'm leaving town. We depend on law enforcement officers. It's just shameful that a few bad apples have tainted the reputation of so many good law enforcement officers. I think community policing is the pathway to enhance relationships with community stakeholders and law enforcement, because they get the opportunity to see law enforcement people as real people. Most of the time when they come to African American community, they come in there in a role of checking you, putting you in check, in a role of to some degree being the enforcer. And I think that we do a disservice to law enforcement officers when we can only see them as enforcers. They are much more than enforcers. They are, they're community stakeholders. And so we have to de-emphasize, de-escalate that role of law enforcement officer being enforcers. We got to enhance their role as being community stakeholders, our neighbors, our family members, our friends, and so forth. Relationship is very key. So I got introduced to law enforcement officers, as I said, back in the 80s. We worked closely together. We spent a lot of time together. At one point in time, the city of Columbia was moving law enforcement officers in some of the high crime areas. They were moving in, having apartments there, or having houses in those communities. And those things are really, really important. From a historical perspective, for the most part, when African American people saw law enforcement officers, they came in as enforcers. And as a result of that, people are very apprehensive to a certain degree how they react. Again, that relationship is really important. When you live outside of the community that you're serving, and you have no relationship with those communities, it's going to create a bad situation. And we can't afford to do that anymore. And we have a lot of discussion now about, coming together. I remember, I'm old enough to remember that after the assassination of Dr. Martin Luther King in 1968, the federal government put all kinds of money out here to try to help enhance the relationship between African American people and the broader community. I think one of the challenges we have is that people are not educated
Okay, JT.
about African American. Yes.
Okay.
I'm here. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you just fine. And
Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you. You've definitely said a lot, and you've made a lot of great points. And so some of the things that you were saying definitely sound very solution oriented, and also giving us some resolutions with what we see with police brutality. And so one thing, and actually Krogan had brought this up earlier, and I wanted to ask you is, do you think that police officers go through empathy training? When you're dealing, because like you said, sometimes like when there's certain situations that are going on and they come to, a particular situation or a scene, is that, it's like they're already ready to be on alert. And then people that are in that situation are kind of like, this is just a tense situation. So sometimes there needs to be more empathy that needs to be handled depending on the situation, of course.
Well, I think we all are products of our environment. Mm-hmm. A lot of times when people see African American people together, they think very negatively of them. We did a study several years ago where a group of African American boys went into a retail store, and then a group of white boys went in the same retail store. And they followed the African American boys around, and the white boys and African American boys were working together. So the white guy stole stuff. And they got outside, when they got through, they split it. But they didn't follow the white kids around in the store. So we have this perception that African American people who steal, we don't know anything about African American people. At one point in time, we talked about having African American history. So people avoid the history. Some people feel that African American people have not contributed anything to the world in the area of arts, medicine, religion, philosophy, mathematics, engineering and so forth,
Right.
And so there's a perception that only thing African American people are doing, consuming products and not giving anything back to the community. And I think that could be overcome if we educate people. People need to be educated.
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes, no, you're definitely right about that. And I know that we are getting short on time. So what I'm going to go ahead and do is I am going to go ahead and introduce one of our members here at Alpha Media Columbia, and she goes by the name of Diamond Chambers. And so we're going to talk to her in a minute. Hello, Diamond. How are you?
Neek, I'm good. How are you?
Good. And we definitely want to make sure that part of this conversation, we include millennials, and Diamond is a millennial. She was actually on the front lines at the protest that was going on May 30th. You went actually the entire weekend, that Saturday and that Sunday. So I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to turn it over to Krogan, and he's going to talk to you a little bit. And Curtis as well,
Hi, Diamond.
Diamond, join
Hey,
us as
Krogan.
well.
Hey,
And
Curtis.
Krogan's going to be joining us too. And good deal. We're glad that you're with us. And we're going to ask this a couple of questions real quick. Then we're going to bring the panelists back and go through some question answer type stuff real quick so that again, we were respectful of your time. I know we said an hour and we're hitting up on that hour about 4 minutes from now. So we'll get through this and then go to any questions that our viewers may have had and then do the wrap. So Krogan, go ahead. Your turn to ask Diamond some questions.
Yep, a live streaming experience across all the brands with Alpha Media, and that includes some of our, classic rock and pop stations. For a lot of people tuning into the news, seeing burning cop cars and stuff, right in the middle of it, the cause is just. Tell us a little bit about the messaging and what you're hearing from the community and what sort of change you'd like to see, Diamond.
I mean, the rallies, the protesting is definitely an experience within itself. It's the most high-low experience that I've ever encountered in my life. One thing I did take from it, just as Mr. McLawhorn said, there was just no communication. And I believe the mayor mentioned it as well as Curtis. You have force tasks that are out and, they have bulletproof vests and they have batons and they have rifles and they have bullet rifles and they're pointing it at you. And in the scheme of it all, people just want to communicate. People want their voice to be heard. They want questions answered. So it's like when you have task force that are coming out with, all of these things that they can do to combat you, and all you have is maybe a water bottle or a rock to throw at them, now as a community, you become in defense. And, it doesn't help with trust in the law. It doesn't help with trust in police. It just kind of makes everybody just in this defensive mode. And like Neek said, it becomes a tense situation. And it was very tense, very, very tense.
The catalyst for change, the amount of not just young people, but people from all walks of life, all age demographics, and a lot of us saying the same thing. I think in our country, Diamond, having you physically there it's part of a massive, powerful movement. I know the mayor took time out of his day to come down and speak with protesters. And I think that was a healthy dialogue to hear some of the young, energetic folks out there that are really trying to get some change, not nationwide, but it starts here in Columbia.
I agree. I mean, and I commend the mayor so much. He was out there with like paper and pen, listening to, people my age, people of different races. He was on the ground, praying with people, talking, and just trying to get the best communication started that he can. It starts with that. It starts with that line of communication. But as everybody knows, it's a long road. It's a long journey. But I definitely think conversation and communication will open up the door.
Indeed. Communication is powerful. It's very powerful. And so Diamond, the unity that was going on with the protests and, and we saw that there was definitely unity among all races and all walks of life. And so tell us a little bit about that experience and telling us that, do you feel like when you guys went to the police precinct that it caused more danger for you guys, or, what was that about?
The rally started everything, and that was totally fine. After 3 o'clock, you know, everyone that was at the State House, a majority of everybody that was at the State House, they did decide to march to the police station. And I do believe that's when things got flared up even more. I mean, you had people out there with megaphones saying, hey, like, come talk to us. Like, we have questions about things, you know, and this is all people of my generation, all millennials, you know, no younger than like 20, you know, to ages 29, you know, but people want answers. And, you know, there was even at one point, you know, Leon Lott was there and, you know, people were calling him out personally, like, come talk to us. You know, I got a question about my brother, like something happened with my brother 10 years ago. Like, people had personal situations and they just wanted to be, you know, they just wanted to be heard. And all that, it was so beautiful because, you know, it wasn't just, you know, and I hate to use the term so loosely, whites and blacks, you know, there was Asians, there was Hispanics, and I can honestly say that, you know, President Obama was right. Like, this generation is the generation that will catapult the change that's necessary.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you for that. And thank you for your input. I know that we are getting short on time right now. So I'm going to turn it over to Curtis.
Diamond, let me ask you this. Thank you. You know, trust is big. Trust is almost everything in a sense, you know, when you're talking about dealing with people. And when you talk about the older generation, such as Krogan and Neek, and then the younger generation, such as me and you, Diamond, what can the older generation do to help build that trust back up?
Healthy communications like this is a start. I feel like a lot of times the older generation is here and the younger generation is here. And it's like, okay, we're older and we're wiser, so we know more. But then there's the younger generation and it's like, okay, you may know more because you've lived a little longer, but we also kind of see towards the future. We see things in a way that you don't see it. And I just feel like if more conversations were open, you know, instead of each era looking at each other in a defense type of way, I feel like it should be, okay, well, here, you know, I'm 57. And when we were having these protests, you know, this is what we did. And it may not have worked, you know, looking at how things are today, but, you know, based on what we did and seeing what you all are doing, you know, I think it's great. You all have more energy, you know. I just think there just needs to be more open conversation when it comes to both generations. I feel like, and I can contest to this, you know, being a young millennial, sometimes I am stuck in my own perspective. And when I say open conversations, I mean, you know, not just open dialogue, but open-minded conversations as well. A lot of times you can have conversations and you just have two people that are stuck with their own perspectives and there's nothing that's conducive. There's nothing that's being translated in communication. So I just feel like healthy dialogue, open conversations, open-minded conversations is a start. That's a start to everything. I feel communication, definitely.
Diamond Chambers, thank you so much. Stand by, bring back in Krogan and also Neek. And this here is where, if you guys have any questions, or if we got any that came from any viewers that we want to address to, whether it's going to be Mayor Steve Benjamin or Dr. Cassie Alliott or Police Chief Skip Holbrook or JT McLawhorn, President of Columbia Urban League. So any questions that you guys have that we need to address them as we get set to wrap this up.
While we get some questions lined up, I was wondering if we could bring the mayor back in. I thought Diamond talking about, and this was a big look for me to see that, you know, our elected officials were hearing out young individuals. And Mayor Benjamin, I'd like to welcome you back into the room. You know, what kind of things were you hearing? And I got to tell you, it was so incredible. And we talk about the power of cell phones capturing injustices in action. To see you, it was just someone with a cell phone, and you're sitting there with protesters. I thought it was so powerful.
Well, I'll tell you. First of all, I love Diamond. I adore her, and I have for years. I had a chance to see her on Sunday, I believe it was, and you know, you see her eyes. She's always lit up, always smiling, you know, and everything else. And that day on the corner of Assembly and Gervais, I saw the pain in her eyes, you know, and it touched me. She had the mask on, everything else, but I saw something else that I had not seen in our many previous encounters, and it spoke volumes to me. When I sat with those young people that Monday at the State House, I tried to make it a point to not go there, and some of them I'm sure knew who I was. One young man, he'd introduced me in Congressman Clyburn years ago as a student at Eau Claire High, and he was about a foot taller when I saw him on the ground there. but sat with them and didn't try to tell them who I was, didn't try to even jump into the substance of the issues. The question I asked them was very simple. It was tell me your story. Tell me your stories. Because I think so often we jump into a defensive mode, we jump into a generational discussion. As Diamond mentioned, we start talking about everything else, and we don't shut up and listen and realize that God gave us 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. We should be listening twice as much as we talk. And I just asked them, tell me your story. Why are you here? And the range of stories from either personal experiences or experience of a friend and someone was there as an ally, or someone was just heartbroken watching the videos of George Floyd, or talking about Ahmaud Arbery or Breonna. I mean, just listening. It's edifying, and it makes you better at the job that you do, and I think it allows people to establish the very basics of humanity. That I'm a human, you're a human. That this person who feels thingified is not a thing. He is also flesh and blood. That the officers who are standing across the street, as I was talking to them, that they're not blue robots. They are also flesh and blood. I think it allowed us to have a much more human discussion that has now led to some of those protesters. I'm not exaggerating. I speak to every single day. Every single day. We've had Zoom conference calls. We're talking about real issues of policy, learning about them, learning about me, learning about families. And then I think it allows you to start having real conversations. But you got to make sure that it keeps going back to the real policy changes and progress that we need to have to move the community forward. But it starts with human connection. And I remember looking in Diamond's eyes on that corner, and it hit me in a way in which every encounter I had with her over the years, I'd never been hit before.
We have a couple of people, they're really enjoying the town hall. I think this is a productive conversation. Regina Williams asks when the planning can start. You don't have to get into specifics, but I think the conversations we're having over the past 2 weeks are powerful. In your opinion, Mayor, when do you think that first steps start?
For the record, Krogan, her name is Regina E. Williams, and she will always correct you to make sure you know her name is Regina E. Williams. I've known Regina the entirety of my adult life, and the reality is that the plan needs to start very soon. I mean, I think you got to throw up that sail to catch the wind right now, and it's got to. We have meetings. Council meets all the time. We talk about strategic planning and visioning and everything else, and I'm being serious. Nobody shows up. I mean, citizens, all the outreach you can do. What I have learned from this particular moment that we're in is that now so many people get their news from so many different sources. There was a time 30, 40 years ago, back when Curtis only had 4 jobs, where you might get your news from 3 different news sources, the 3 primary news stations, and everyone got the same news at the same time. And now literally you can walk in a room with 20 people and they're relying on 100 different sources, some reliable, some not, but that's where they get their primary news from. So we got to find a way as we move forward to make sure that we're speaking to the entire community, creating a dialogue that has everyone, including some people who would be very difficult for them to leave their safe spaces, wanting to share their stories, but not necessarily feeling fully comfortable about being engaged in this public discourse. So the plan is, and I haven't talked publicly a great deal about it just yet, but I'll just say some things about it right now. I think we need to use this as a transitional moment for the community. We are dealing with all these amazing and seismic issues right now. We're dealing with this very specific issue of violence and police violence and systemic racism and criminal justice. We're dealing with a pandemic we haven't, unlike anything we've seen in 100 years, that's having a disparate impact on communities of color. We're dealing with the economic disruption, unlike anything we've seen since the Great Depression. We're in the middle of probably the most important election in the history of our lives, and we have political failure, at the top of the system right now. So we got all these major issues, which, and I might add, I'm not claiming it, y'all, but we're probably going to have some serious inclement weather events and some hurricanes and issues like that. We are in the middle of these major issues right now. So we need to start planning as to how we're going to start building this community where we want to be, not in 2020, but in 2030 and 2040. And this is the very first opportunity I've ever seen in my 30 plus years in Columbia that we actually can have an incredibly, truly inclusive amount of voices involved in this chorus. Usually it's us. We now have young people and old people and people who have incredible experiences who may not have been blessed as we have been. This is a moment. So the answer is it's going to start soon, probably within the next couple of weeks. So stay tuned.
All right. Thank you, Mayor. Appreciate that. Krogan, you wanted to bring up Diamond real quick, or are we going to do the final thoughts from our panelists?
I think, we have talked to a lot of incredible people today, and I want to thank each and every one of them for being a part of this call. I think that the catalyst right now in our country is so incredible, Curtis and Neek. I don't know who to turn to next, but we could do another hour. We could do 2 more hours.
Yeah, we definitely need to do a part 2. We need a part 2.
Curtis, can I bring everybody in for a selfie, please?
Yeah, sure. Let's do that.
Chief Holbrook still here. JT, Mayor Benjamin still on the line.
Do here is let those who are still here give a final thought, and then we're going to close this thing out so that again, we're trying to be respectful of time. So Mayor, I'm gonna let you go last. I'm going to let JT go. I can see from you from this town hall.
Kurt, you asking me?
It's good, JT. I think it's yours.
Like we've lost Curtis. Completely live experience. JT, final thoughts. We're coming to you.
Okay, thank you very much. First of all, I want to commend Afro Media for hosting this event because we have to talk about these issues. I think the problem we've been in silos too long, and this is a wonderful opportunity for us to talk and to come up with a strategic plan where we got many voices involved. I think what we're doing now, we are planning with the people versus planning for the people.
Chief Holbrook, you've been very patient throughout the entire broadcast, and thank you for staying with us. I'm going to come to you.
Yes, sir. This has been a great hour and 10 minutes. You can go ahead and log me in for the part 2. I want to be part of the conversation. Empathy, understanding, and awareness. I wrote those 3 things down. That's my takeaway. I agree. We got to do a lot of listening, and I look forward for that opportunity. Diamond, I see that charisma and that look that the mayor's talking about, and I look forward to listening to you as well. And, we've got a remarkable opportunity in front of us that it can happen if we do this together. And I am 100% certain we're going to get where we need to be. Thank you for having me tonight.
Absolutely. I appreciate the time. Cassie, Serve and Connect and the mission, thank you so much for sharing it with us today. Any final thoughts before we close down our first town hall here?
Oh, my word. I just wish I could spend the rest of the evening with all these wonderful people. I feel really blessed to be a part of this conversation and richness of thoughts and perspectives. I think the final thought is to not lose hope. It's a really hard time for our country, but sometimes in the darkest moments is where the brightest light can shine. And I think that bright light can shine in our city and in our state. I mean, look at the leadership that we have. Leadership from Chief Holbrook and Deputy Chief Kelly to an outstanding mayor, Steve Benjamin, and an incredible city council and city manager. I think the voice is Diamond. You shine so bright, and I think you represent such a beautiful voice and where we can look ahead and have a vision. And JT McLawhorn, you have been such a stable source of hope and vision in our community. And this is just a few people on this call. We have so many other people that are standing up and leading. And I think if we can come together and share those voices and those assets and those gifts, man, our city really can be a leader for change in this time. And I look forward to seeing where we are a year from now.
I want to bring Neek back in. Neek, I'm thinking Mayor and Diamond, we're getting a lot of comments about the dialogue. You guys need a bunch.
Definitely, absolutely. Like I said, you know, as soon as we actually finish, we're going to go ahead and start planning part 2, and we want to have, you know, everybody back on, and we'll probably definitely make sure that we add some additional people to it because, you know, as I said before, communication is powerful, and we definitely need to keep the dialogue going. But after we have this communication, now we need to go ahead and start, you know, creating a plan of action. And Mayor, you were talking about that in the next few weeks, and you know, let's go ahead and let's make it happen. So we keep the communication open and we plan and then we take action.
Amen. Amen. Am I saying something, Nick?
Oh, if you would like to. Well, actually, we need to go ahead and move on to Diamond because I know we're, like I said, we're getting you know, we're going way over our time. So Diamond, what are your
Diamond?
You know, thank you for allowing me to be a part of this platform with so many like inspirational people. You know, and at the end of the day, we're all human. You know, love conquers all, and we weren't put here to hate. You know, I'm sorry that the world has kind of gotten that way, but we weren't put here to do that. So, you know, I'm hoping and I'm praying that the dialogue definitely continues after this, you know, because in many situations we've had these conversations and it dies out and we're back to square one. You know, I just hope that we continue to keep the dialogue open and the open minds. And I just thank you.
Well, we're definitely going to do that here at Alpha Media, and, you know, and everybody that we had on the panel. We just want to thank them so much for your time, you know, your energy, your effort, and everything that you do to put back into and pour back into Columbia and our community, our home. So thank you so very much. And, you know, Curtis and Krogan, I don't know if you guys have anything else you would like to say in closing.
Yeah, this is the first of 3 days of dialogue, some big names coming up, and I want to thank everybody that's here this evening. We're looking forward to a massive replay of today, and of course, more dialogue Thursday and Friday across Hot 103.9, the Big DM, Fox 102.3, Q93.5, Alt 99.7. For those that haven't thrust themselves into this conversation yet, I think over the next couple of days, it's time.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
Again, thank you to our panelists, and thank you for tuning in tonight. It looks like we lost Curtis Wilson. He did an incredible job. And thank you, Diamond and Neek, and to everybody watching. Good evening.
Yes, thank you.